So Trey, your sort of I don't know if I would say your tagline, but something that I read that you had said really struck me, and it was that you believe that your purpose is to make it easier for people to do what they love. Talk to me a little bit about where that came from.
Yeah, well, look, you made me smile when you said it. I mean, that just means so much to me. I think I've been so fortunate to come from a place of privilege in my life, just knowing that I've got a family history that I can trace back to the mid 1800s, and we've got a family Bible to where I can look at my ancestors and see their names or see their handwriting. And I know that for a lot of people of color and Black people, they don't have that. And even growing up, my journey was different. I went to 8 different schools by the time I finished college. We moved 11 different times. I had a rich dad, poor dad kind of situation where at my dad's house, he was a lawyer and the third Black judge in the county history, and was just so rich and is so rich with knowledge and wisdom and information. And my mother was, never made the most money, but I never knew we were broke either. And so that gave me a perspective of love, of faith, of just happiness and joy, regardless of your circumstance. And so I never needed much coming up. But just as I went through life, I realized how much I enjoyed helping people. Even back in kindergarten, they said I would be a baseball player and a child psychologist. And so that was really close because I played football in college and I studied psychology. So I've just always had a heart for people, and I've always had a heart for making people feel good. And I feel like I've been blessed with a gift to bridge gaps between generations. I feel like I can understand my elders very well and heed their wisdom, but I'm also able to translate their wisdom into practical skills and principles for the generation that I'm in and those coming up after me as well. So it's just something that I've had to do a lot of digging on myself, and understand who I am and where I fit with God and what I'm really been put here to do. There's been trials and struggles through it, but I just really love helping people. And so when another guy I interviewed, Justin Moss, said, when you see someone do what they love, it makes you want to be a part of that dream or start living your own. And so that's the way I live my life. When you see me, I want you to see me doing something that I love. And when you see me loving what I do, it should inspire you to do the same thing.
Yeah. And so you talked a little bit about being in South Bend, Indiana, and you grew up loving football and that was your first love. And now you're doing so many more things. So you're a speaker, you're an entrepreneur, you have your own podcast called The Dash. Tell us a little bit more about how you got into and sort of the path on this journey to be doing all of those impactful types of things.
Yeah, so I mean, growing up, I was always a big sports fan. I started playing baseball when I was 6 and football when I was 8. I was never good at basketball, though. I cannot lie about that one. But football became a vehicle for me. My brother told me one time, my older brother Austin, he said, "Trey, just don't forget that football is what you do and it's not who you are." So my journey through football paid for my education. Oh my goodness. I went to Miami, Ohio. It would have been very expensive to go there on my own out of state. They paid for me to study abroad. I got to play in some of the Michigan Stadium in front of 100,000 people. I played on ESPN and watched myself on replay. I've been to Boise State and the Blue Turf. And at the same time, I didn't play my first 2 years. So I had an opportunity to really dig into my academics and was able to serve in various labs and participate in speaking forums and campus life events and all kinds of festivities to really have experience. And when I came out of school, it was actually, the journey is just kind of crazy how it all came together. My last semester of college, I actually decided not to play a 5th year and to study abroad at our sister school in Luxembourg. And since I did that, I didn't have an opportunity to do a job search. And while I was over there, I just got really into speaking and motivation and Les Brown and Toastmasters and committed myself to being a professional speaker and world champion. And about a year later, after I got back, we did end up going to the World Championship in 2016. I made it to the semifinals, but that was all she wrote. And so from there, it's been all about education. I've worked for the governor's school here in South Carolina, a couple of different civic projects with asset-based community development. I've had a chance to partner with, a big school like the Governor's School, like I mentioned, and also a Title I rural charter school in Bishopville, South Carolina, that I've partnered with in teacher development and everything. So over the course of the last 3, 4 years, it's really just been a place where I've been able to narrow down my niche. When it started with, I want to help people, then it was, I want to help kids, then it was, I want to help schools, then it was, I want to help school communities. Okay, now that I want to help school communities, I want to help them live their purpose, be them best selves, be able to live and practice their social and emotional learning skills, because I think that's where the heart of what I do lies as well.
And I wanna get to that. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because the Gammage Consulting, group that you have founded and built from the ground up, you really focus a lot on social emotional learning and development. And I really wanna dig into that because, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about it's recent that we're now all aware of this and that these
Yeah,
programs are coming into the schools, but is it really recent in that these are the things that kids are going through? Has this
right.
always been there and we just weren't aware of it? So, you know, what is it that you're doing with the social emotional learning within the schools that you work with? And how, can we sort of pinpoint when those skills really need to start happening in the classrooms?
Yeah, so I think one, you're absolutely right. We're just starting to hear about this. It's a trend that's starting to become a standard, and all 50 states have adopted SEL standards for pre-K, or like 5 years old and under. But only a few states have adopted K-12 versions of SEL, and I think it's so important because it's your self-awareness. It's your ability to read verbal and nonverbal cues. It's your ability to communicate with people with things other than your words, and also recognize what that means with words. So, for me, it started from a place of psychology and, social psychology, cognitive psychology, abnormal psychology, kind of make up emotional intelligence, or at least it led me that way to emotional intelligence and communication. And when you just look at those two things by themselves, emotional intelligence, communication, I mean, look, you communicate 100% of the time. There's not a moment in the day where you're not communicating something to somebody, whether it's yourself
Mhm.
or a million people that on a podcast, you're communicating all the time. And the emotional intelligence, the ability to understand yourself and understand others in layman's terms, I mean, my goodness, what can you do with those two skills right there?
Mhm. Well, and when you say communicating, you don't mean just we're having a conversation. You're talking about all areas of communication: body posture, facial expressions, mannerisms, voice inflection, and the words that we speak as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's the same for students and kids. I just had a vision come to my head of a student that I sat down with yesterday, and just by the demeanor of the child, I can tell what kind of mood they were in, and that helped me understand how I needed to approach the conversation with that student. Okay,
Mhm.
and it's the same with an adult. If I'm a teacher and I woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning, I've got debts I can't pay. I've got relationships that aren't fixed. If I bring that into the classroom with me, I have to be aware enough that it's going to impact everybody in my classroom, everybody that I come in contact with today. So I have to be able to understand myself enough to understand when I need to adjust myself for the betterment of my school community. And
Mhm.
those skills you start to learn through play in kindergarten and first grade, but they become more explicit and they become more implicit really as you grow older. And we want to make it something that is a standard and not just a trend or a best practice.
Right, and then looking at the other side of it, which you mentioned briefly, was that if you are a teacher or an educator and you're trying to learn, you mentioned that there are now social emotional learning standards and all of these, curriculums that teachers are implementing, but really as an educator, it's a lot just about being aware and observant and building a relationship with your students so you know what's happening in the environment around you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I mean, there's so many situations that come into play when you talk about SEL, and it's not just one piece. And so I realized even for myself and in my business that I was too narrow-minded in how I was approaching supporting schools. I was at first just speaking to students, and then I was just training teachers. But in reality, it's teachers, students, administrators, school partners, your community, your faculty, your staff. It's tier one, two, and three interventions or implementation. It's a long process, it's a culture. There's a lot that goes with it, but I think the value that comes with building good people trumps any academic test score that you can receive.
Mhm. Yeah. And you talked about this being a trend. So, my next question to you is, what do you feel, because you're knee deep in this all the time. What do you feel are some of the influences in the last 5 to 10 years that are really sort of ramping up the lack of development of a child's social emotional skill level?
I mean, well, let me go back to, and I'm a big proponent of CASEL, the Collaborative Academic for SEL, and their research started in 1990. So they've been doing this research for a very long time, but I'd also say that that's about how long it takes for something to become a trend. You've been working on it for 20, for 30 years, and now it's starting to become relevant enough. So if you look in the right places, like the Urban Assembly, which is a network of schools that operates based on a social and emotional learning curriculum and then academics, or like Miss Maisha Rounds up in Massachusetts, who has a social emotional learning curriculum embedded into her school community. Maurice J. Elias has a book called The Other Side of the Report Card that talks about how to make the comment section of your report card
Mhm.
more usable by adding SEL standards to the back of it with a quarterly assessment that your teachers can do. So there's so many components that you can use. And the truth is that a lot of schools already have many of these components, but they don't have a system for using them.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
so
that,
that leads me into the next question. What is the approach that you're taking with it? Because I
yeah.
agree with you 100%. The skills are there, I think, for the teachers, and I love
Mhm.
what you just said about the comment, section of the report card. Being a prior teacher and administrator, I used to go through hundreds and hundreds of report cards every quarter, and, it was all, sometimes disappointing when I would see these comment sections, but I think we could probably do a whole nother podcast, Trey, on just how to produce a report card that is actually beneficial in some way or how that's changing. But um, how are you seeing these approaches being implemented in classrooms?
Yeah. So, I think again, I've been doing more and more research over the past few years. So there's like 123 different frameworks for SEL implementation. And so, you may hear of MTSS or RTI or PBIS. Lions Quest is a
Mhm.
program that I've used. Again, there's Castle, there's 21st Century. There's a lot of different frameworks. So essentially, the way that you implement it would be in tiers. So in the classroom, you can adopt strategies like TLAC, Teach Like a Champion, and they promote different skills that you use as a teacher that helps you facilitate your classroom better, about different positionings that you can have in the classroom, about different expectations you can set for your students, and things that you can post visually. Those are all SEL practices, or if you want to get deeper, restorative practices, things that build communities and make people stronger, understanding that they have a broken past, that they have a social history. It's adding a reflection area to your room or refocus area when a student can't stay on task or redirections aren't working. You can send a student to a corner that's a little bit comfortable, it's a little bit quiet, or even if they're out of hand, if they are not acting right and you would like to send them to office but want to keep your authority in class, you can send them to a refocus area, or having a teacher partner where you can send them to a cross class isolation where they go to another classroom and get that refocus. So those are a few ideas specifically to the classroom, but you can zoom as far in or as far out as you want to with some of these skills, and never really get to the bottom of the pot.
Mhm. And what do you think is what do you think is really causing us to need so much of this social emotional learning in the classroom? At what point did it now become, okay, we have to bring this in the classroom because our kids are coming to us with issues? Why do you think that it's happening?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's societally you're overexposed and in some places you're underexposed. In a rural community, I'm underexposed to city lights. I'm underexposed to metropolitan areas. In big cities, I'm overexposed to those same things. So I think those, create different neurons and synapses and dopamine and serotonin in your brain where what our kids are dealing with today is just different than what I had to go through 10 years ago. I didn't have a cell phone until I got to middle school. I didn't have opportunity to Google any question that I had. And so that's one pocket. But I think where I am more focused is generational gaps. And so I think we're in a place where power has been held by baby boomers for a longer time than it should have been. But in short, the Generation X that came after baby boomers and between millennials was a very small generation that's known as helicopter parents. Participation
Mhm.
trophies started here. And I think power skipped that generation. And when I say power, I just mean the ability to make decisions. People in control or power with the ability to make decisions are typically much older today in age right now. And we kind of skipped that pocket. Now we're getting to a place where people like you and me are in charge. We're more millennial. We're more focused on the
Oh,
individual.
bless you, Trey. Oh, boy, that's such a compliment.
you're, you're welcome. You're welcome.
At least you didn't put me in the baby boomer yet.
No baby boomer. I don't know what year you're born. We can talk about dates later or
We'll
year
talk about that off of
off
when the
air.
mics are turned off.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
I think that change in generation is why the shift is so dramatic. Essentially, we had teachers that taught for 30 and 40 years that still haven't retired, but today you've got parents who are going into schools. You've got people that are switching from industry that are going into schools because we see the shortage and we see the damage. So, the kids are exposed to different things, and the people in charge haven't yet spoke their language. So we're just getting to a place where and even the teachers that are teaching now had those past traditionalist teachers that didn't let you think outside of the box. But now there is no box to put students in. So you've got to approach it differently, and you've got to approach it from a place of self-awareness and understanding.
Mhm. And so you're talking about it, and it brings up a couple of good questions to my mind as you say this. You're talking about, such generational gaps between some of the folks that are in the classroom teaching, right? So if you have a teacher that's been in the classroom for 25, 30 years and you've got these kiddos coming in that are, this brand new generation, and there's that huge gap. And then you've got the folks coming out of the teacher education programs that are a little bit closer to, the generation of the students. Are you seeing a lot of support and professional development both inside the school system for those teachers that may be coming from an older generation, and also support and instruction and professional development at the university level for those younger teachers coming in so that we can kind of all meet in the middle somewhere?
That's a good question. In my opinion, I think there's a disconnect between what we're teaching teachers for, training teachers for through our school system and college and higher education. I don't think they're necessarily prepared when they're coming out to with classroom management, with behavior skills, with understanding how to lesson plan and keep things in order. And I don't know how to fix that. And even the tests that they take. I mean, I know schools where the best teacher on campus is not certified because they can't pass the praxis. So I don't know what the solution is there, but I think there's a gap between what we're offering in schools and what we're providing to our students. And I think it's going to take some time to milk that. So I think with the schools I've worked with, I've seen a focus on professional development. I've worked with, I think, 10 schools last year that were all interested in some kind of different SEL notion or speech or training development, whether it was a one time or over a year, doing those kind of sessions. So I'm seeing buy-in, but there's another level when you talk about a full commitment and having a budget for SEL and it being connected. Okay, so um, I think a big thing is when you think about a guidance department or behavior system at a school, a lot of times it's in different compartments or different components. How you discipline behavior is different than how you refer somebody for documentation. The level of offense or suspense or outcome, they're different. You're operating in different systems, and a lot of times there's confusion. But when you use an SEL program and you decide what kind of structure or framework you're going to use, you now have a system that the behavior system fits into, rather than having a circle or a solar system of different platforms that you're trying to navigate to come to the same conclusion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you're also dealing with kids that are coming into the classroom from all different types of home life and family background,
Yeah.
and like dealing with a lot of issues just themselves. So there's an entirely different gap between, or disconnect, not only between teachers and students, but students and students.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I hear, so on my podcast, The Dash, there's been a big focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and I've brought in all in together with social and emotional learning. But only 2% of educators, this is just a demographic statistic, 2% of educators are Black males.
Mhm.
But somebody pointed out when they heard that while that may be true, depending on your location, that discrepancy is magnified tremendously. So
Mhm.
2% of Black educators nationwide, but what about in rural South Carolina? What about in metropolitan Los Angeles? Depending on the place that we talk to, the disparity in culture between teacher and student can also be greater. So I think as well, a simple way to understand your students is when you're starting, before you get into pedagogy, taking your time to slow down and immerse yourself into your students' culture. In particular, if you don't come from the same background as your students, because the same way you want them to see that, you want to see them as more than a student, they want to see you as more than a teacher as well in the classroom. So you kind of got to open up, show yourself, and be vulnerable about your background, but you've also got to be willing to dig deep and get empathetic and immersed in your student's background as well.
Yeah. Yes. And so you mentioned your podcast, The Dash, and as I was going through and listening to, I was able to listen to several episodes, which were very inspiring and enlightening. I really enjoyed listening to the episode about what's growing in your garden,
Hmm.
and if I'm not mistaken, I think that might be one of your 8 lessons that you talk about
Yeah,
in the book that you wrote, called "Every Decision Counts." So tell us a little bit about the book, Every Decision Counts, and the 8 lessons. I
yeah.
mean, just, maybe give us a couple of the lessons and what they're about.
For sure. So, I mean, this is a dream come true of mine. I've been trying to write a book for a while, but really wanted to have an audience and have someone specific, and really make it something meaningful before I just wrote a book. So, this is a long time coming. And I mentioned earlier just my experience through education, going to so many different schools, moving so many different times, and having so many changes. The blessing was the different lessons that I've been able to learn along the way. And so I actually, while going through my own podcast, I found 8 to 10 lessons that I thought were really special, and ones that could be translated to principles for young people, middle school and high school students. So I looked at those lessons and I essentially wrote letters to people that I've worked with. To my little brother, dear Saeed, I want you to know that every decision counts. I want you to know that it's okay to make new mistakes, or that failing is your first attempt in learning. And so I wrote letters that were really personable to middle and high school students that I know, with action steps as well. So it's a book that you can read by yourself. You can for sure give to your son or daughter, but it's something that you can also use as direct instruction in class, a book read. And it's at the same time something that you can use for refocus. If you're having that student that is a little distracted, they can go to the corner and open up and read a chapter. So I think, more specifically, every or what's growing in your garden is actually the last chapter. And so
Mhm.
the focus there, the book is aligned with national guidance and SEL standards. So that final chapter is focused on critical decision making and goal setting. And it thinks about your garden. Your mind is like a garden, because if you think about going out back or whatever garden you've been to, the weeds grow by themselves. You don't have to try and plant weeds. And that's the same way as negative thoughts in your mind. They're going to creep up. They're going to be in there. There's going to be seeds of doubt. It's amazing how easy it is for things to come up like that. And Just a quick quote. Richard Devo said, "The easiest thing on God's green earth is for somebody to tell you what you cannot do." You're going to hear no 17 times for every yes that you receive. So those are always going to be there. But the cool thing is you can do the maintenance and you can clean that up, and then you can plant more positive seeds in your garden. It means you have to dig, you've got to cultivate, you got to find the seeds, you got to wait, you got to be patient. But ultimately, you come out with something beautiful. You come out with something intentional that you had to work for and that you can be proud of. So you have to know where you're going, though. So if I want you to live your purpose, I want you to understand what your purpose is. That doesn't have to mean you're an entrepreneur or you have to follow my footsteps or, change your whole life based on this. You could want to be a great mother. You can want to be a great brother. You can want to, make $1 million or sail around the world. It's up to you what your whole purpose is. And so that final chapter is essentially the cultivation of really deciding what it is that you want for your life and how are you going to get there.
Mhm. And that is what I absolutely love about the concept of this book is that, yes, it's a fantastic read if you wanna curl up on a Sunday afternoon and you have whatever desires and dreams and passions in your life, it's gonna fit that. But, it's also a really good teaching guide. It's a really good living book to use in the classroom setting, and I love when teachers use living books instead of, just I kinda like to just throw the textbooks out the window, because to me, life is not about dates and times. And I know some of that's
Right.
important, but when you're really trying to reach the heart of a kid, this is such a great book for those moments in your classroom setting with your middle schoolers or your high schoolers or your fifth graders to just pick a segment out and read it and really have them understand where they are in their life and how things can impact them. And so the name of the book again is Every Decision Counts, and it's about the 8 lessons that you wish that you would have learned in school. And you
Yep.
also have your podcast, The Dash. Now tell us where our listeners can, tune into your podcast. Where's that available at?
For sure. So the dash, you can of course go to my website, tregammage.com to find anything, but it's also on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, pretty much any podcast platform that you prefer to listen to, it should be on there. And if not, on social media is a place that you can definitely find me. Just at Tre Gammage, like damage with a G and two M. And then Trey is just TRE, almost like three.
Yeah. And Trey, I cannot thank you enough. I'm so grateful that I had a chance to sort of, talk with you before this recording and get to know you a little bit. And I'm so inspired by not only what you're trying to do in life, but what you're trying to bring into the classroom. And, it really is something that's needed. And I think that, your heart, you have such a good heart and you're such an inspiration for those teachers that could possibly be saying, I don't really know how to handle this group of kids because their social emotional learning is so low. You're there to help them. So thank you so much for what you're doing, and thank you for being a guest on Classroom Matters today. It's really been a great conversation.
Of course, it's my absolute pleasure. And just a final snippet on the Dash podcast. It's called the Dash because it's the dash of life. And so, in that dash, every decision that you make counts. It's the sprint, the things you do every day. But at the same time, it's the marathon. You don't remember people for the day they're born or day that they passed. You remember them for the decisions they made while they were here. So, every decision counts is about living that dash to its fullest potential. And I so appreciate you and your journey in helping people understand that the classroom matters.
It does. Such a great note to end our podcast on. Thank you to Tre Gammage and the Gammage Consulting Group. This is Kristy Houle, the host of Classroom Matters, signing off, and we'll see you next time.